Does it say recording? Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay. Hi, everybody. Let us continue where we left off last time, where we were talking about Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's contrast between the way other nations observe their Sabbath and the way the Jewish people observe our Sabbath. And what he was trying to get at is that you can't compare the two. And it's very difficult for us to have a frame of reference as to how the Sabbath was observed in the 12th century in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's world, how Muslims observed the Yom al-Jum'ah and how Christians observe Sunday. Certainly they took it more seriously than Christians take Sunday today, many Christians, and certainly we could probably assume that in a Muslim society, Yom al-Jum'ah, the Friday day of services, is very different from the way it is in a Western society where Friday is a work day. Unfortunately, Muslims are at a disadvantage in a Western society because Friday is a work day. And so when they need to go to prayers on their Sabbath, which, as we explained last time, is Friday, they have to go to during their lunch hour. On Friday, they have services at 1, they have services at 2, something like that, and then they have to rush out. It's like they have like a half-hour service, and that's it, and then they have to go back to work. Some of them have a minhag not to work Friday afternoons because it's a religious day, but it's definitely not the way that they can observe it in a non-Muslim country, so that creates a little bit of tension for the Muslim community. And certainly when we look at Christians today, they don't have Hilchas Shabbos. There's no Hilchas Christian Sabbath, unless you're a Seventh-day Adventist. And therefore, the Christian Sabbath has, in many ways, decayed and devolved into a day of watching the football game or other things, or shopping or things like that for a lot of people. That doesn't mean that there aren't very religious Christians. We know just, of course, about the tragedy that happened this week in a church, where in many places in North America, Christians still take their Sabbath seriously. But Rabbi Yehuda Halevi still insists that the way that Jews observe their Sabbath is not only a more serious type of observance because of all of the laws of Shabbos, all of Hilchos Shabbos, the 39 malachos, complete abstinence from all forms of work and so forth, and the sanctification and the obligation to sanctify the day with Kiddush and 3 meals and so forth. But it's also, fascinatingly enough, the key to the preservation of the Jewish people. Shabbos is the key to our people's preservation from century to century, from iteration of exile to every other exile that we've been in. And this is where we're up to on page 276, paragraph 10. The Kuzari said, "I have been thinking about your condition, and I have observed that God has a secret reason for keeping you alive." Now, when we talk about God's secret reason for keeping the Jews alive, what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is alluding to, according to the commentaries, is a very, very deep issue. And I think that for now, I'm just going to tell you, look at the footnote, and he references a section in the 4th essay, paragraph 23. The Jewish people are like a seed which falls into the ground, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says over there. The seed, when it's put into the ground, seems to decompose and fall apart when it's after the first few days after it's in the ground. But really, what is happening to the seed? Instead of really decomposing, it's growing into something that it's destined to become. And so, what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is alluding to over here is that God has a secret reason for keeping you alive for so many generations, so many centuries in the diaspora, and we're going to learn about that later. Let's put that to the side for now. God used the Shabbos and the Yomim Tovim as one of the most important ways to preserve your identity and splendor. Were it not for these days, The nations would have divided you and taken you because of your understanding and clear intellects as their servants, and they would have placed you in their armies. They have not, however, because you observe these days in a superlative fashion by abstaining from all work. I get this question a lot of times from people who have a conference, let's say, over a weekend, and they want to know, it's very important for my work for me to be at this conference. Should I go to the conference, even though it requires me to stay in a hotel? I can be Shomer Shabbos at the conference, but I have to go and attend. It's very non-Shabbos-dik, and it's not in the spirit of Shabbos, and I'll have to do all of these things, and won't be near a shul, but I really need it for work. And one of the things that we try to discuss is, the key to our preservation as a people, and the key to our preservation as individuals, is having a Shabbos together with our family in a Jewish community. And were it not for Shabbos, we would have been totally lost. We would have been totally assimilated for the reason that he describes. We would have been conscripted into their armies. We would have been conscripted into their workforce in a way that would have been without restraint. And this would have completely pulled us away from Yahadus. Think about all of those stories that we know of people in the earlier part of the 20th century who had to find a new job every week because when they didn't show up to work on Shabbos, they were let go. And thank God life has become easier, but there's a clear line of delineation between the Jew and the non-Jew in every place where we go because of the Shabbat and because of Yom Tov. Anyone who hires a Jew knows that they have to make special accommodations for Sabbath observance. And that really makes a very, very strong line. We're very fortunate in the 21st century. We're very, very blessed. We live in a tolerant society, and we live in a wonderful civilization in Canada, the United States, where special accommodations are made for the Jewish people. This is unique in history. But think about all of those periods in Jewish history where those accommodations were not available, and therefore opportunities were denied to Jews, and yet those denied opportunities were also the key to our preservation. He says, you do so because these days come from God, and because they have strong cause for their celebration, and that they commemorate creation, the Exodus, and the giving of the Torah. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi maintains that Shabbos reminds us of three things: the creation, the Exodus, and the giving of the Torah. These are all divine matters which you meticulously observe. We essentially condense it to two whenever we say Kiddush. We say Zecher L'Maaseh V'Reishis. It's a remembrance of the act of creation. And Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, and a remembrance of the Exodus. But when we say Exodus, we really mean to imply the Exodus and everything that came immediately after, which is the giving of the Torah as well. Now, it certainly is a reminder of creation. Ki sheishes yamim asah Hashem es hashamayim v'es haaretz v'yom hashavi'i Shabbos v'yinafash, that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. Our resting on the seventh day is imitatio Dei, is an emulation and imitation of God, and therefore that's what Shabbos observance means. It's remembrance of the giving of the Torah, because the fourth commandment of the 10 commandments is observe the Shabbos day. But it's also a remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. And there are different ways to understand this. The Ramban says that the reason why it's a remembrance of the Exodus is because the Exodus was an affirmation of our belief that God is the creator. How so? Because up until God inserted himself into creation with the bringing of the miracles of the Exodus, man had no proof that there was a creator. But now that God has demonstrated at the time of the Exodus that he could manipulate the entire laws of nature and split the sea and bring plagues and do all of these miraculous things, he demonstrated that there is a creator who is in charge of all of the physical world. And therefore our observance of Shabbos is also an affirmation of the Exodus when we first met the Creator qua Creator. Okay, so that's one way of understanding why we say Zecher Liyetzias Mitzrayim. But it's not the whole picture. The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim tells us something else. And the truth is that if you look at the first time the Ten Commandments is written versus the second time the Ten Commandments is written, you see two different emphases. The first time the Ten Commandments is written is in Sefer Shemos in Parshas Yisro, and there the emphasis is on creation in 7 days. But if you look in Parshas Va'eschanan, towards the end of the Torah in Sefer Devarim, you will notice that the V'zacharta, the obligation to remember is Ki Eved Hayisa Be'eretz Mitzrayim, that you were a slave in Egypt, and that's why I'm commanding you to observe the Shabbos. Where is this connection between remember you were a slave in Egypt? So the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim, which you have in front of you in your handout, offers us a little bit of insight on this issue. And the reason why I feel that this section of the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim is so relevant is because there, do we have enough sheets to go around? Oh, there's a whole bunch over here.
I have an extra one here, so now we have to.
Okay. Is because you'll notice that there are undertones of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in the Rambam in his Moreh Nevuchim. You'll notice that so many things that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi writes about Shabbos being the key to our preservation as a people is something that the Rambam echoes as well. Take a look, and of course we have this in English. He says, it is perhaps clear why the laws concerning Shabbos are so severe, that their transgression is visited with death by stoning, and that the greatest of the prophets put a person to death for breaking the Shabbos. What is he referring to? The greatest of prophets is whom? Moshe. And Moshe put someone to death, in Sefer Bamidbar, Tzalafchad, according to tradition, was put to death for violating the Shabbos. Okay? So that's what he's referring to. So, what's the big deal about Shabbos? The Rambam's going to tell us. The commandment of the Shabbos is the third from the commandment concerning the existence and the unity of God. For the commandment not to worship any other being is merely an explanation of the first. The Rambam's counting of the 10 commandments is to put Shabbos as number 3. In other words, it is the third in a sequence of affirmations of Hashem's existence. You know already from what I have said that no opinions retain their vitality except those which are confirmed, published, and by certain actions constantly revived among the people. What he's essentially saying is that in order to express belief, according to retain belief, you have to take that belief and put it into physical practice. If you don't take an item that is intellectually here and use your physical body to affirm that belief, then eventually the belief dissipates. And this is very much what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says over here, but he also said it, if you recall, in the second essay as well. And I'm just going to give you the citation, and you can look at it yourselves later. And maybe we'll take a look at that next time. In essay 2, paragraph 50, subparagraph 6. So just so that you can get the reference, it's on page 213. He says, Sabbath observance is inherently an affirmation of God. That's what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had said. And the Rambam is essentially saying the same thing. When a person observes Shabbos by physically abstaining from work, he's affirming his belief in a creator. Therefore, we are told in the law to honor this day, in order to confirm thereby the principle of creation which will spread in the world when all peoples keep Shabbos on the same day. For when the question is asked, why is this done? Why are you Jews observing Sabbath? The answer is given, for in 6 days the Lord has made, etc. And then the Rambam writes, Two reasons are given for this commandment because of two different objects. In the Decalogue in Exodus, the following reason is given for distinguishing the Shabbos, for in 6 days, etc. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. But in Deuteronomy, as I mentioned, Parshas Va'eschanan, the reason is given, and thou shalt remember that thou hast been a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore the Lord thy God commanded thee. So the Rambam writes, this difference can easily be explained. In the former, the cause of the honor and distinction of the day is given, meaning the Torah says, honor the Shabbos. Why? Because the Lord has blessed the day of the Shabbos and sanctified it. And the cause for this is, for Kisheishis Yamim Asa Hashem Es HaShemayim V'Ha'aretz, Uvayom HaShivi'i Shavas Vayinofash. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. But the fact that God has given us the law of the Shabbos and commanded us to keep it is also the consequence of our having been slaves. For then our work did not depend on our will, nor could we choose the time for it, and we could not rest. And here is the point that I believe that both Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and the Rambam are making over here. The reason why we observe Shabbos is to affirm that we are not slaves. We are not slaves to our work, but rather we are a distinct people who can control the destiny based upon a larger or a higher calling than just working in the same way that the rest of the world works. When we were slaves, we didn't have the liberty to work whenever we wanted to. And thus God commanded us to abstain from work on the Shabbos and to rest for two purposes. Namely, that we might confirm the true theory, that of the creation, which at once and clearly leads to the theory of the existence of God. That's reason number one, as it appears in Shemos. And number two, that we might remember how kind God has been in freeing us from the burden of the Egyptians. The Shabbos is therefore a double blessing. It gives us correct notions and also promotes the well-being of our bodies. It allows us to realize that once in a while you got to take a break because you're not a slave, you're not a workhorse. But it's also the key to the preservation. Rambam doesn't say exactly what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is saying over here, but there's connection between the two. Here Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is suggesting that there is a national benefit to the Jewish people. Shabbos not only is an affirmation of our faith, it not only allows us to rest our bodies, those are tremendously beneficial, but there's a third benefit that he's mentioning over here, and that is it has prevented us from assimilating and has allowed us to retain our distinct national identity. And therefore, and I want to emphasize this more as we move along. So take a look in the next paragraph. Were it not in the Kuzari, were it not for these holy days, the lowliness of your spirits due to the incessant exile would create a climate where not one of you would ever wear clean clothing, nor would you have an occasion for gathering together to recall your Torah. Were it not for these days, you would not have even one day of pleasure out of all of your days. This now sounds more like the Rambam about not being a slave. Now, however, 1/6 of your days consists of physical and spiritual relaxation, which is of a quality that not even kings can attain. Why 1/6? Why not 1/7? 1/6 is Shabbos plus what? Yom Tov. If you take into account all of the days off that we take off for Yom Tov, then we're not abstaining from work 1/7 of our year, but really it's 1/6. If you can do the math. I mean, we do it on the bottom. It's add a total of 8 festival days to the number of Shabbos in a year, and you get 60 days out of 365. 60 out of 365 is approximately 1/6. Okay? Yes?
When he says, if not for Shabbos, you wouldn't put on clean clothing, it reminds me of what my mother told me. My mother was a little girl in Shanghai with her parents at the Mirror Yeshiva, and she said that the whole week she wore her dress inside out, and on Shabbos she would turn it the right way.
Wow.
So,
Look at that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when he says that, it reminds me of it. But I wanted to ask you, based on these reasons, does it make sense? You said that Christians and Muslims don't keep the Sabbath anymore the way they used to, and they're shopping. I'm saying, based on the reasons we're learning here, why should they keep the Shabbos? Okay, they didn't come out of Mitzrayim, and they're not supposed to be separate from everyone else. I suppose they could still affirm creation, but it doesn't make sense to do it on the 5th or the 8th day.
So last week, I know you were away last week, but we talked about the origins of Sabbath in both Christianity and Islam. Both have a reason. Christians observe Sabbath not only for the creation, but also for the resurrection.
No, but I'm saying
And
from
Muslims-
our point of view, not from their point of view. I know they have their reasons.
Yeah.
But do we think that non-Jews should keep the Shabbos on Shabbos?
No, we don't. As a matter of fact, it's a unique bond, it's a unique contract
Exactly.
between God and
So
Israel.
why shouldn't
The
they go
Gemara
Shabbos?
says that a goy sheshavas chayiv misa, a Gentile who observes the Shabbos to a T, deserves the death penalty because it's a unique relationship. You know that joke. You all know the joke, don't you? Guy's been learning with his chavrusa for 30 years. And one day his chavrusa peers over and he says, listen, I have a confession to make. I know we've been learning for 30 years Gemara, high-level Gemara for 30 years. I have a confession, I'm not Jewish. What? You're not Jewish? I don't understand. How can you? He says, yeah, my mother never converted and I just grew up in a Jewish community. He says, well, if you're not Jewish, then, why don't you just go off and do your own thing? Just have fun. He says, because I like the stimulation of Torah study, I like the community and so forth. He says, but wait a minute, I see you every Shabbos. Don't you know we've been studying the Gemara that says, Goy Shabbos Chayiv Misa. A Gentile who observes Shabbos is liable for the death penalty. So he says, yeah, don't worry about that. I always carry a key in my pocket on Shabbos outside, so I'm not observing Shabbos. He says, what are you talking about? We have an Eruv. He says, I don't hold of that Eruv. So anyway, that's the old joke. Anyway, so your question is, what's the point of Rabbi Yehuda Levi making that contrast? The answer is, because what he was trying to demonstrate, and the reason why we're coming into this section to begin with, is because Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is trying to point out that the type of richness that exists in the Jewish set of mitzvot is unparalleled in other nations' religions. They have a reason to observe Shabbos, but even their very sincere reasoning does not translate into an effective Sabbath observance for them. Just like their circumcision, which was the previous discussion, does not translate into an effective circumcision. And so many other examples of where their practices, even though they're sincerely meant and they try their best, because it's not based on the same kind of structure that is God-given, cannot rival the Jewish system.
Could I just follow up with a question?
Yeah.
What would you expect the best case scenario for a non-Jew to be? It sounds to me like you're lamenting that they're not keeping Shabbos.
No, we're not lamenting it. We're just pointing out that if you try to find other systems that can rival Judaism in their complexity and their richness, you won't find it. That's what he was. That's the whole point.
But before, when you said that their Sabbath has devolved into shopping and football, what would you like to see them doing instead?
No. You're missing the point. The point is that because it doesn't have the same structure and safeguards that the Jewish Shabbos does, that's why it naturally has devolved over time. The Jewish Shabbos, for other kinds of Jews, may have devolved. But for the central core of Klal Yisrael, Shabbos has always remained Shabbos because of all of the halachos that revolve around our observance of Shabbos. That's, you've probably seen those things. If there was a Shulchan Aruch on how to make a Christmas tree, then they would be much more machmir on how to make a Christmas tree. If there was a halachas of Christmas tree, just like there's halachas of building a sukkah, all right, or other things. it would be a totally different. We have a halachic system, and that system is such that it is a safeguard against the deconstruction of our observance. That's the point. In any event, just getting back to this idea, just to finish the paragraph. This is because, in other words, what he says, our observance of Shabbos and Yontif, 1 day out of 6 of resting and abstaining from work, gives us the richness of life and allows us to some breathing space so that we can remain a nation, a princely people. This is because they do not have peace of mind during their days of repose. If they have to toil and travel on those days, they toil and travel. Their spirits are therefore not completely at rest. In other words, Shabbos is a greater day of rest than the best vacation that even a non-Jewish king could propose to make. Why? Because when you're on vacation, you still have distractions, you still have matters of state that if there's an emergency, you'll be tugged away. When it's Shabbos for a Jew, it's Shabbos. Like nothing gets, except unless a life-threatening emergency, nothing gets in the way of Shabbos. And that's the difference between a man-made Sabbath and a God-given Shabbat. So just to recap, what he's essentially said is the preservation of the Jewish people and our prevention from assimilation is based in Shabbos, and the ability to have a rich quality of life is also due to Shabbos. And both of those are keys to the preservation of the Jewish people. Now, I don't want to use up all of our time. I just do want to go over this very important section. I want to talk to you about Achad Ha'am, who lived in the 19th century. Usher Tzvi Hirsch Ginsburg, who was known as Achad Ha'am, lived from 1856 to 1927. As his biography online states, primarily was known by his Hebrew name and pen name Achad Ha'am, was a Hebrew essayist and one of the foremost pre-state Zionist thinkers. He is known as the founder of cultural Zionism. With his secular vision of a Jewish spiritual center in Israel, he confronted Theodor Herzl. Unlike Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, Ha'am strived for a Jewish state and not merely a state of Jews. The difference, now Achad Ha'am was not observant, but the difference between Achad Ha'am and Herzl was Herzl had a national identity for the Jewish people devoid of any religious identity. Achad Ha'am believed that even though you didn't have to be strictly Orthodox, it still was necessary for the Jewish people to have a Jewish religious character if we're going to have a Zionist state. So the Zionist state needs to have a Shabbos. It may not be a Shabbos with all of the halachas of Shabbos, but he still believed it has to have a Shabbos. And he felt that you therefore cannot divorce Zionism from the Jewish religion. And that was his point of contention or departure from Herzl. So here's what I want to talk about. Oh, thank you. That's very nice. Thank you. Okay. So here's what I'd like to talk about. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu. Achad Ha'am had two opponents that he had to combat. One opponent was the Herzl Zionist, who believed in political Zionism devoid of any religious identity whatsoever. Who was the other opponent on the other side? Was the anti-Zionists in Berlin, who believed that Berlin was the New Jerusalem, and that we didn't have to have a Zionist ideal. We could create religious Judaism. We could create Judaism could exist anywhere, and to have it all coalesce around one geographic location was wrong. So, and that is the Reformation, the Haskalah, that takes place in Germany. Next week, God willing, I'll be in Berlin at this time, so we won't have class next week. I'm going to see the new Holocaust Museum in Berlin, and hopefully I'll learn more about that period of time. But Take a look. This is an essay written by Achad Ha'am. You've probably heard this very famous statement from Achad Ha'am: more than the Jewish people have kept the Shabbos has kept the Jews. It is clear that Achad Ha'am got this quote from the Kuzari. So the next time, what we just read, so anytime, if anyone ever tells you that was Achad Ha'am, you say, no, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi said it in the 12th century. He didn't say it as succinctly, as concisely, but this is exactly what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is saying in these paragraphs. Take a look at this fascinating essay that he's writing at the end of the 19th century. By the way, later in life, we all have a connection to Achad Ha'am today, every time we drink a glass of tea, because he ran the Wysotsky Tea Company in England later on in life. Anyway, okay, that's just a little tidbit of information. So he writes as follows: Havikuach al davar ha-Shabbat be'osfat rashei ha'ida ha-berlanit. He says this whole debate over the Sabbath, when we talk in this conference that is gathering in Berlin, he must be referring to some Haskalah or Reform Judaism conference. Shehi'ir alav echad mechavereinu ra'ui be'emet l'simat leiv mikama panim. So one of our colleagues has brought up the issue of the relevance of Sabbath for the modern Jew. And it's really very important, worthwhile for us to pay attention to this discussion for a number of reasons. Ro'im anu anshei shem chokrim chofshim harechokim me'amunah. We see men of distinction who are free thinkers, but are very distant from faith. Hamodim b'peh malei shehem atzmam enom shomrim lo et ha-Shabbat v'lo et sha'ar chukei hadat. He says they admit freely that they do not observe the Sabbath or any other laws of our religion. Yotzeim b'chol zot lahagen b'chol kocham al ha-Shabbat betur institutzia historiit shel klal ha'umah. But they nevertheless, translated, they nevertheless insist with all their strength that to demand that the Sabbath remain an institution. It's a historical national institution, is basically what Achad Ha'am is arguing. People who have no connection to religion do not observe Shabbos, but still demand to preserve Shabbos as a national institution of the Jewish people. Ubali kol tzel shel hatzviut hadatit, without necessarily the shading of the religious coloring. Shahita tofeset lefanim makom gadol bevikuchim ka'elu, rak mita'amim le'umiyim bilvad. They're not getting involved in the religious issues of whether a Jew has to observe Sabbath or not. Let's put religion aside. This has nothing to do with religion. Sabbath is a national institution. Einam maskimim afilu lahosif Shabbat shenit shel goluyot. And they don't even agree to, I'm not even sure what he means by that, to add an additional second day of Shabbos. In other words, I guess basically,
But the reformers don't.
the reformers, I guess, feel that that you can't say that Shabbos is different in the exile. I think maybe that's what he means. He says Shabbos is Shabbos, it's a national institution, and v'chiyesh lecha raya gedola mizu al hitorut hergesh ha'yehudi ha'le'umi haregesh ha'yehudi ha'le'umi bein achenu shebema'arav gam michutz lamachaneh ha'tzioniyim. He says, don't you see, therefore, that even in Berlin, where they're opposed to Zionism, they nevertheless feel that there's a national flavor or identity to the Jewish people. So, in other words, it's a defense of those who are anti-Zionists among the reformers, that even though they don't believe in the Zionist dream, they still believe that there's a glue that has to unite the Jewish people, and that glue has to be the Sabbath. It doesn't have to be a religious Sabbath, but it's got to be a Sabbath nonetheless to keep us intact as a people. Ein tzorech lihiyot tziyoni o medakdek b'mitzvot bishvil lahakir erech haShabbat. You don't have to be a Zionist. You don't have to be a religious Jew to appreciate the value of Shabbos. Amar ba'oto ma'amad echad migdolei ha'edah, said one of the great leaders of that Berlin faction. Vahadin imo. And you know what? He's right. The world recognizes the value of Shabbos. Katy Perry recognizes the value of Shabbos. She tweeted that she observes Shabbat, whatever that means. But the world recognizes the value of Shabbos. Mi shemargish belibo kesher amiti im chayei ha'uma bechol hadorot. Someone who feels in his heart some kind of true bond with the national life of our people throughout the generations, hu lo yuchal b'shum ofan, afilu im eno modeh lo ba'olam haba v'lo b'medinat ha'Yehudim. He's unable, even if he doesn't acknowledge the existence of an afterlife, even if he doesn't acknowledge that there should be a state of the Jewish people, litzayer lo mitziut am Yisrael b'li Shabbos malkasa. He cannot illustrate in his mind the existence of the Jewish people without the Sabbath queen. There has to be, the Shabbos is the fundamental national marker for the Jewish people, is essentially what he's arguing. Efshar lemor belishum hafraza, ki yoter mishi Yisrael shamru et ha-Shabbat, shamra ha-Shabbat otam. And therefore we can say without exaggeration that more than the Jews have kept the Shabbos has kept the Jews. V'luleihi shehechazira lahem nishmatam v'chideshat chayi rucham b'chol shavua. Were it not for the fact that Shabbos restores their soul and renews their spiritual life every week. Are you hearing these words? Where does Achad Ham, where do you think he gets this from? Compare to what we just read. 1/6 of your days consists of physical and spiritual relaxation. Compared to the Rambam, it gives us correct notions and also promotes the well-being of our bodies. Were it not for this day that renews our souls, hayu hatlaot shel yemei hama'aseh moshechot otam yoter v'yoter klape mata. Then all of the ordeals of the 6 days of the week would drag us down lower and lower. Ad shehayu yordim lebasof lidyuta ha'acharana shel chomriyut v'shiflut musarit v'sichlit. Until we would go to the lowest level of physicality and a lowly sense of intellectual and emotional state. Ve'al kein bevadai ein tzorech lihiyot Zioni bishvil lahargish kol hadar hakadusha hahistorit. Therefore, you don't need to be a Zionist in order to feel the great historical holiness hachofefet al matana tovazu that hovers over this great gift, ulehitkomein b'chol oz neged kol hanogei ba, and to rise up with all your strength against anyone who would try to do away with the Sabbath for the Jewish people. But then he writes something, and this is part of a much larger essay. We'll finish with these last couple of lines, which I find to be somewhat ironic. Ein sorech, there is no need, he says, to be a Zionist in order to appreciate the value of Shabbos. Aval haya'aleh al hada'at, but can someone actually think she'ein gam to'elet b'tzioniyut l'davar zeh, that there is no benefit to Zionism with in having a Sabbath? She'efshar la'adam lihiyot tzioni, o gam echad merashei hatzionim. Is it possible for a person to be a Zionist, or even one of the leaders of Zionism, mibeli lishmoa bi'imkei nafsho kol mecha'at haregesh ha'le'umi neged bitul Shabbat, without hearing in the depths of his soul a protest against those who would try to nullify the Shabbos? Kinir'eh efshar ve'efshar. It would seem, yes, it is possible. In other words, yes, you don't have to be a Zionist to appreciate the value of Shabbos. Is it possible to be a Zionist and not see the value of Shabbos? Also possible. Because there's different types of Zionism. There's political Zionism, and then there's national, or what did we call Achad Ha'am? Cultural Zionism. Or really, I think cultural Zionism is a bit of a misnomer. He's calling for a religious identity for the Zionist project. Thus, he's not necessarily subscribing to Hilchos Shabbos, and he probably was not a Shomer Shabbos in the fullest sense of the word. But the idea of Shabbos being the preservative of the Jewish people, being the glue that keeps us together, providing us with this necessary ingredient of our longevity, that he certainly subscribes to. The only sort of caveat we would add to Achad Ha'am is, Mr. Ginsburg, with all due respect, where you got it wrong is that to have a Shabbos without Hilchos Shabbos will result in an inferior kind of glue and will not keep us together and will not preserve the Jewish people.
That's what I've been thinking the whole time you've been reading this.
Okay.
I mean, it's so obvious. Otherwise,
But wait a
it's
minute.
just Oprah
Listen.
having the day with your phone turned off.
But you want to know something? I agree with you. And
So
that's
why
why,
bring this in a laudatory way?
because there's an appreciation of Shabbos that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is telling us everyone has to appreciate, even if you're not fully observant. We just had a Shabbos project, right? We invited people into our homes, into our synagogues, to experience a taste of Shabbos. Did we know that they're not going to observe Shabbos in the fullest sense of the word? Did we know that they're going to drive to and drive home from the places where we invite them to have a taste of Shabbos so that they could hear Kiddush and that they could have a challah bake and experience something beautiful and something spiritually enriching?
That's totally different.
It's not totally different. It's not totally different. It's the same idea. I contend it's the same idea. You're free to disagree. But what we are trying to do is give the world a taste of Shabbos. Achad Ha'am missed the point. He felt that as long as you just have that cultural taste of Shabbos, then that is sufficient. It's not sufficient. But it's something that you can savor even if you're not a completely halachic Jew, a religious Jew. And that's what we have to use as the attempt when we try to connect the Jewish world together. We have to find those ingredients that will connect us. We have to find those experiences that will appeal to the larger Jewish population. That's the point I'm trying to make by bringing Achad Ha'am. Yes?
So are you saying that by appealing to the larger Jewish population and they're having some aspects of Shabbos, that's okay? I mean, that they're not observing it in the same way as you perhaps were, and perhaps realistically a lot of those people wouldn't be. Like maybe they'll light candles or they'll buy a challah or something.
Right, listen, that was what the Lubavitcher Rebbe was all about. He felt, I'm not going to succeed in making everyone into a Shomer Shabbos. That's not practical. It's not realistic. But what is realistic is to try and have everyone appreciate the beauty of Shabbos. Let's get every woman to light Shabbos candles. Let's get every man to make Kiddush for his family. That's what's realistic. And Achad Ha'am latched on to that. So while he fell far short, we have to appreciate that he saw the beauty of Shabbos even as a non-observant Jew. And therefore, when we're reaching out, Shabbos is one of the greatest tools that we can use for outreach. Yes?
Well, with the Shabbos.
Let me just mention just one other point. What is the objective of outreach? Is it to make everyone into a Shomer Shabbos Jew? There's something that's very important to think about. I'm going to try to be makarev, my next door neighbor. What's the end game? That they should be fully observant? Is that the objective? Maybe. But what if someone would tell you, listen, no matter how hard you try, this person's never going to become from. So do I therefore say, okay, my work's done here, let's go on to the next victim? Or do you say, let's say a Navi would come and tell you, that person's never going to be Shomer Shabbos. I've already seen how their life plays out, it's never going to happen. Do we say, okay, on to the next person? Or do we say, if I can get that person just to do one more mitzvah and have an appreciation for Hashem, even if they're not living a halachic life, I've accomplished something truly great. Yes?
My question is, let's say you have, non-religious people come into your home. A lot of times, what I've observed is they don't really absorb the spirituality of it, from my observation. What they do is they look at it as a nice, culturally Jewish meal. From my observation, like, oh, the gefilte fish, the challah. I make challah too. You know, like they don't tap into the idea that it's all related to Hashem and creating the world and.
I think that's an overgeneralization.
Okay, I know. I'm just saying, from my observation,
everyone's different, and it certainly provides an entree. It provides an entry point for someone who's truly curious to learn more about Shabbos. Yes, having someone at your table one time and have that experience,
no,
maybe.
There's been several times, but the thing is, they've pretty much told me they don't believe in God.
Well, you're talking about some specific examples.
It's
You
a
can't.
specific example.
Yeah, but you can't extrapolate from there.
So I'm just, I know, but I'm just
Okay.
saying, like, will it change, if somebody does not believe in God, is it gonna change anything? Maybe, but.
Maybe, even if they don't believe in God. I don't believe people when they say they don't believe in God. Okay, go
I
ahead.
agree what you said about that, if you can get somebody to do a mitzvah or something, whatever, and they've grown a little bit. But then also, when we had a past lecture in this room, you mentioned that people would be punished in the Olam Haba when they're not doing Shabbos. So if those people who are they're still Jewish and they're only going to go so far and they're not going to become from, to hear that like you're going to be punished in some way.
Have you ever heard me say that to a non-observant Jew?
One lecture here in the class.
Oh.
Quoting a text.
It could be I was quoting a text, or it depends on the context, but that's not something that we would say to incentivize someone. Sinners repent or experience the hellfire of the Lord. Yeah, that doesn't seem to work these days so well, huh?
Yeah, no,